Well, I just want to start, Brandon, by thanking you for taking the time to chat with us at the Christian Beat, all about your latest release and then your upcoming tour and all the exciting news in between.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to start with the ache. And just, I think I want to know first, how did the project kind of transform for you from its like original inception of the start of it versus like when it was actually out and was a finished piece of work?
That's a good question. I actually always had the concept for the ache.
Hmm.
Um, in fact, I've probably had it for 10 years. My wife and I kind of helped to coin the phrase of the feeling that I'm talking about. When I was on the road, whenever I was missing her, I would tell her I'm feeling the ache. And she knew exactly what that was. So the ache is essentially a feeling that I had when I was a kid, when I was missing my dad. I'm going to try to move this over so I can look straight at the camera here. Um, when I was missing my dad left my life and my mom's life when I was about 3. He was making some poor choices with his life. And I think it was necessary for him to have that time. Unfortunately, uh, he was out of my life for a while. I would see him about once a month in that year and a half period, which is not enough when you're a grown boy to only see your dad once a month. Um, but I remember when my mom put me in this babysitter's house. She had to go to work every day, and so I would go to babysitter's house during the day. And if I stood at a certain place in that babysitter's backyard, I could see the sign for where my dad worked. He worked at a Howard Johnson's. And so every once in a while I'd sneak over to the fence. I had some great friends at my babysitter's house. We honestly had a lot of fun. But when I was missing dad, I would go and look at the sign and just wonder if he was thinking about me and what he was doing. So I have that feeling. It's a physical ache. It's like right here. And whenever I'm leaving, like my daughters sometimes at school, or if I am leaving like a mentor of mine, somebody specifically, maybe more of like a male father figure in my life, I
Hmm.
feel this ache. And so I wanted to write a whole record around it. So start to finish, I knew that I wanted to have a song called The Ache, but it was the last song that was, well, second to last song that was written for the record. Um, but I was also saying goodbye to my mom. My mom passed away last year. So it's very real time, you know, feelings happening. And I think that's the best way to write songs. They don't get more authentic than when you're in the moment. So that's kind of how it all came about. And I would say, I mean, I had faith that it was going to be good, but it turned out better than I thought.
For sure, for sure. And it's always curious to me when you have those tracks that are title tracks, if they come first or second, if they, influence or if they're kind of the wrap-up piece, because I feel like it's either one or the other. It's never in between. So,
Yeah, I think it's an either or. You're right. It was last. So I had tried to write like 3 other iterations of the song, and it didn't have the feeling that I wanted it to have. So I asked a friend of mine, an old friend of mine that I've been writing with for years. His name is Lee Miller. He's a country writer, but Lee tends to write in the style of story. And so when we wrote it together with Sagen, our producer, um, I went about it more from an autobiographical standpoint and got really a lot more specific with the details. And I think that's when it brings power, you know?
Hmm.
So it was the right approach, it was the right sound. And so it ended up being the title track.
That's awesome. I'm curious with how much of you that you put into this record and this project specifically. How does hearing the stories of others as they get to interact with the music once it's released, how does that change any of the tracks for you, if it does at
Hmm.
all?
Yeah, that's a good question. You mean like after it's out and people are
Hmm.
having feedback? You know, that's only really happened to me one time. Um, on a record of mine, there was a song called The Harvester, and it was on a record of mine called Blue Mountain.
Hmm.
And I wrote The Harvester about a fictional person. But then when I heard about Billy Graham and the way, he certainly followed that scripture, uh, the harvest is plenty and the workers are few. I think that he was a great harvester. And so I've always dedicated that song to Billy Graham.
Hmm.
But typically a song will always mean what it means when I wrote it. And I always say, a song is mine the day that I wrote it, but after that it belongs to whoever wants it and whatever it means to them. But I think, a song will always have the original meaning for me because it met me in the place there that I was that day. So I don't think that it can really change meaning for me.
Oh, that's fair. Are there any of the tracks that are speaking most to you in your current season? I mean, they've obviously spoken to you at some point, but I'm just curious if there's any of the tracks that are um, speaking most to you now, or if you've kind of
Mm.
wrapped up that piece and you've looked elsewhere at this point.
No, you know what? On the way to school this morning, I take my girls to school most mornings, and this morning they wanted to hear some daddy music, is what they call it. Daddy music. And so it's about the only time that I listen to myself in the car. Um, but we put on the song called Lucky, and I'm in a season of feeling very fortunate, not only to have finished the album, but just some very fulfilling moments being a dad, being a husband, also having done music for almost 20 years. I just feel very fortunate. And the song Lucky really, it kind of comes from every once in a while I'll say, "Oh man, you're lucky," or I'll say something like that, and somebody's like, "No, no, I'm blessed," or "You're blessed, not lucky." And I'm like, "Yeah, but lucky just seems like it captures it more, you know?" The best way I can put it is that I don't believe that someone who is born in poorest Africa is more or less blessed than I am to be born in America. Or I don't think they're less blessed than I am. But I believe that I'm lucky that I was born into America where there's so many opportunities and there's wealth. And now sometimes there's downsides to wealth that we are so short-sighted. And as it says in the Bible, it's easier for a camel to go through the head of a needle than it is for a wealthy person to enter into the kingdom. Um, or at least to get the concept of the kingdom. And I think that's kind of true. There's always something that I think people who live in third worlds can teach us. But I have been so lucky to have the opportunities that I have.
Mhm.
So that's kind of what that means. I just feel very lucky.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And I'm curious if there's any tracks that you maybe weren't expecting to get the response that you did, and if you want to share about one or two of those.
Yeah, there's a new song. The last song that was written for the record is called or How to Apologize.
Mhm.
And I just felt like I hadn't really fully captured the 80s, not just sound, but the 80s feeling, because the ache really comes from when I was a kid in the 80s. Even the cover is of me going to the beach, for the very first time. My
Mhm.
mom and I, when we moved out of my dad's house, we were living in an apartment with my dad. My mom and I moved into the upstairs of this house in West Nashville, of this family. They were kind enough to let us stay there, and they invited us to go to the beach with them, to Florida,
Mhm.
and I had never been to the beach, and I mean, even though I was, like, 3 years old, I remember it so vividly, and the photo that was taken of me was either taken by my mom or by the woman that invited us to come on the trip,
Mhm.
and I was really sad at the time, but also really happy. There was kind of a paradox happening,
Mhm.
and that's why I love that photo. Um, there's also a meme going around right now that if you have the haircut that I had in the 80s, which is basically a bowl cut, that the meme says you might be eligible for compensation if you had this haircut. So I just think it's hilarious. It's definitely having its moment, and it's pretty surprising and fun.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
So I also wanted to ask you then about the tour upcoming. It's going to be in a couple weeks, I think, that you actually kick off, if I
Yeah.
have my dates right. So do you just want to talk about a little bit of what your hope is for those nights?
Yeah. I did a tour in the spring, and this is kind of the fall leg of the tour. It's called the God is Good tour.
Hmm.
And I haven't done a headline in a lot of years, in over 10 years. So this is the first headline tour that I'm doing, which basically means the night can be whatever I want it to be,
Hmm.
which I love. But it's an acoustic night, so it's really just me and guitar telling the stories behind the songs that people are familiar with of mine over the years, but then also talking about the new record.
Hmm.
And I just hope that people come and remember that, they have this friend named Brandon, who's been making music that they've listened to for a long time. Uh, and I hope that they feel that comfortability with me as well as I'm making new music. Um, I really, at my core, I like being hospitable and I like being a storyteller. And so those are the two things that you'll experience in this night. I got my friend Jesse LaBelle coming with me, so that's going to be fun too.
Awesome. Awesome. So I'm curious if there's any moments from, I guess, what you called the spring leg of the tour that you're looking to build upon and add on as you go out on this fall leg.
Yeah, it's going to be different. I had two opening artists with me in the spring, and this fall, it's just really going to be me. Jesse's going to be doing a few songs, but it leaves more time for me to really tell a longer, fuller story. So I'm really excited about that. I think it's going to be a good night.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know we're getting close to the end, so I just want to give you the opportunity to just share what's on your heart and what's in your prayers right now as you think about the listeners and those that are impacted by your music.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate that I have gotten to be a part of writing the songs that are a soundtrack to their lives. I see it as one of the great honors and privileges of my life. Um, I am a dad, and so I'll be away from my daughters and a husband, so I'll be away from my wife. So when I'm on the road, I I look for friends, and I've got usually some that are traveling with me. So I really just hope that I can be your friend, and I am on a very similar journey to so many people out there where I'm in my midlife at this point, and I've got things that I want to talk about. And I hope people are receptive to that and want to chime in as well.
Awesome. Absolutely. Well, thank you for taking the time, Brandon. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jesse.